Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a moment for individuals to get into the meeting, and then we will start. Okay, well, it looks like we've stabilized at about 45 attendees for this meeting. I just want to introduce myself. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mimi Larson. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Administration at the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. And this morning, we are going to be presenting to you about an upcoming rulemaking that the ECMC will be conducting in May. The rulemaking is on the Colorado Parks and Wildlife proposed high priority habitat maps. I'm going to turn it over to our partners at CPW, Taylor Elm and Karen Voltura. They'll be presenting to you this morning about the HPH maps and what the proposals are for 2024 that ECMC will be considering. So with that, I'll turn it over to Taylor and to Dr. Voltura. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. I appreciate it. Going to attempt to share my screen here, and then I'm going to probably lose you guys. So if someone could give me a verbal confirmation once they could confirm that my slideshow is going.
You are good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, stakeholders. My name is Taylor Elm. I'm the Regional Energy Liaison for CPW's Northwest region. And we certainly appreciate you joining us today for an overview of CPW's proposed high priority habitat, or HPH, as many of you know it as, map layer changes. These updated wildlife habitat layers will be the subject of the proposed 2024 ECMC rulemaking process and ensure that oil and gas regulations are relying on the best available science. A quick reminder for those that are not already aware, CPW's newly proposed HPH layers are available for viewing and download on ECMC's website and their online mapping tool. Additionally, CPW has prepared a summary document that contains much of the information you'll hear presented today and even has further detail regarding changes specific to the Northwest region and the SAM, or Species Activity Mapping process. Just be aware that document is available within the 2024 shared Google folder, 2024 HPH rulemaking folder, that is. And that also contains an assortment of PDF maps compiled by CPW, many of which you'll see in the presentation today. And these are intended to help illustrate proposed changes for the 2024 rulemaking. And with that, I will note that today I'm joined by my counterpart, Dr. Karen Voltura, CPW Southeast Region Energy Liaison. And I will now actually pass it over to her for an overview of some of the HPH changes that typically occur statewide and more so on an annual basis.
Good morning. Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate everyone joining us today for this stakeholder meeting. If you could go to the next one, Taylor. I'll be covering some of the brief overview of the statewide updates that were proposed to be included in this rulemaking. This map is not one that's sort of officially in the appendix, but we've prepared it in order to help you kind of see the big picture on these. This includes all layers, both 1202C, 1202D, and the consultation layers included under 309E1. And this map is meant to sort of highlight the changes that are proposed this year. So the green is the 2023 maps that are currently in effect. In here, we've highlighted in red what are proposed additions to the map, and we'll go over each of these sort of in detail throughout the presentation today. And then it shows in black areas that are proposed to be removed from the maps. As a reminder, these annual updates include some statewide updates, and those are primarily our raptor nest database, which I'll talk about in a minute, our grouse and prairie chicken habitats. And then this year we do have some aquatic habitats that are proposed changes in the rules. The remaining changes are related to the species activity mapping. These are going to be highlighted in the Northwest region and are primarily to big game. Eagle roosts and bats are also covered under our SAM, our species activity mapping. And Taylor will go over those in detail for his. So again, these maps, again, are sort of to highlight where we think most of the changes are this year. And this is available at the ECMC website as well. Okay, the next slide, please. I want to talk first about some of the proposed changes to the 1202C habitats, and these are those no surface occupancy layers. We'll talk about here, but this map shows you in the same sort of color scheme. Green is the 2023 maps. Red will show you the areas that are proposed additions, and black will be the proposed areas that are no longer active in this. So there are some aquatic layers on here, and I'm going to save that. Taylor's going to go over those a little later. The LEC sites here are the dots, and it's probably easier when you download this. You can see it a little better, but there are red dots that are either new LECs proposed, or in some cases, new raptor nest locations proposed. And then in black, you'll see those that are no longer going to be included if the proposed updates are approved. The other no surface occupancy, there are some bighorn sheep production areas. Those are primarily in the Northwest region. I think there's a little bit that is on the border into the Southwest region. Those are actually included in the NSO. And then we have state wildlife areas. In terms of numbers, overall, there's about a net gain of about 100,000 acres in this 1202C, about a 1% increase over last year. The majority of these changes are probably from the aquatic layers and from changes to state wildlife areas. I also do want to identify these are sort of net gain. So for the aquatics, we did lose a fair bit in some areas, whereas we gained some. The Eastern Plains has some native aquatic species that over the last 5 years have identified new stream segments or elongated some existing segments. We also have, Taylor will highlight some of the changes in the Northwest to those aquatics where we removed a fair bit of habitat. For LECs, we have actually a smaller increase this year, only about 6,000 additional acres compared to last year. And we have smaller increases in raptor nests, again, compared to the 2023 changes. And I did mention the bighorn sheep production areas. There are some changes, but again, smaller changes than we've seen in previous years. There are some changes to the state wildlife area acres. These are not necessarily new areas. We've had some kind of map corrections. We've also removed a few and added some. So over the course, it's a net gain of about 30,000 acres. So next, we'll look at some of these statewide changes in detail. Taylor, if you could go to the next slide, I think we're on LECs. So grouse and prairie chickens are updated annually across the state. Again, there are 6 species within the managed habitats under Senate Bill 181. We have 2 categories of habitat. Under 1202C, we have LEC locations, and these are locations that are surveyed every year. There are species-specific kind of survey guidelines that the state follows, as well as sort of the data collection. For each species, under the 1202C habitats, they have a species-specific LEC buffer for that NSO, meaning there's documentation from the literature and research that tells us sort of where that primary impact would be. And those LEC buffers protect not just the LEC, but also generally about 50% of the high-quality nesting habitat associated with those LECs. This year, we do have a much smaller increase than last year in terms of LEC locations. And if you go back and look at that previous slide, when you look at those PDF maps, you can see all those black dots are LECs that are no longer considered active, and some new ones in the area. Some of the ones that we've seen are Morgan County. We have some new greater prairie chicken LECs on the map that showed up in red on the previous maps. And then we have very small increases in both Columbian sharp-tailed grouse and greater sage grouse. For the second year in a row, we're seeing continued decreases in Gunnison sage grouse LECs, lesser prairie chicken LECs, and plains sharp-tailed grouse. Those are probably the 3 least numerous species in Colorado for the 6 grouse species that we track. The second type of habitat included under grouse and prairie chickens is the 1202D habitats, and these are considered production habitats. So this is meant to encompass the remainder of that high quality nesting and brood raising habitat. For 4 of the species, for greater prairie chickens, for Columbian sharp-tailed grouse, plains sharp-tailed grouse, and Gunnisons, those production habitats are an extended lek buffer. So it is all really based around that lek location. So correspondingly, if there are more leks, we're going to see more production habitat for those species. There is an increase this year, particularly tied to greater prairie chickens. In terms of their production habitat, there were decreases for both Gunnisons and plains sharp-tailed grouse. Lesser prairie chickens are mapped sort of independently of leks, and there are no proposed changes for that habitat this year. There are some proposed changes, I think, for the greater sage grouse, and I'm going to pass that to Taylor since they're all in the Northwest, and it's a complicated set of rules. So I'll let him explain the greater sage grouse changes.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Happy to do so. I think as many folks out there know, we do not typically make changes on an annual basis to the greater sage grouse habitat designations. Those are priority habitat management areas and general habitat management areas for the most part. This year, there is proposed change, fairly targeted to a couple specific areas. One area in particular for the priority habitat management area changes. This is a result of the Bureau of Land Management conducting a resource management plan amendment for greater sage grouse range-wide in the western U.S. And as part of that, CPW working with BLM on that plan amendment, BLM requested that the state review current mapping and see that it's up to date, or if there's any areas that may need to be updated. And as part of that review process, luckily everything checked out for the most part as being up to date. There was one area in Moffat County, west of the town of Craig, where there were some lekking areas that at the time of the original mapping didn't meet the minimum threshold to be included in the modeling effort. For reasons not entirely understood, those leks in the past several years have really increased as far as their attendance by sage grouse, to the point that recent survey efforts now indicate these leks meet that minimum threshold. And so the request was that this area be run through the original model, the same parameters and everything, but these leks be included. And the result essentially was that general habitat in that area was converted to priority habitat. And so you'll see a little bit later that we actually have a decrease in that general habitat, but that's where you see this increase for greater sage grouse and kind of where that occurs in Moffat County.
Thank you, Taylor. And I will say that the numbers that we're saying here in terms of added acres are not independent acres. In many cases, these do overlap with other habitats, particularly in Taylor's area. Greater sage grouse often overlap with some of the big game habitat. And same thing in the Northeast region, some of that greater prairie chicken habitat does overlap with some mapped pronghorn habitat. So these are not necessarily independent acres, but they do show either net gains or losses from the 2023 maps. Taylor, if you could go to the next one. The other main statewide update I'm going to provide is in regards to raptors. We covered in pretty significant detail how we manage our raptor database, particularly in the 2022 map rulemaking hearing, as well as in the statement of basis and purpose that was published in April of 2022 after that hearing. We also reviewed it a fair bit during last year's hearing, so those recordings are available. In addition, last year we did a draft SBP, sort of frequently asked questions document that may also have some information, and that will all be linked in the folders that we can provide as well for some additional detail. But as a reminder, the Raptor Nest database covers not all raptors, our raptor database has a lot more raptors in it than are in the high priority habitat or in the Senate Bill 181 list. There are 7, I think, primary raptors included in this, 6 of which are mapped by CPW. Our database is primarily from our own survey data, our own staff, our own trained volunteer programs that go around and look during the breeding season to identify which nests are active, which species of bird is on there. And if it is a raptor that's included in the high priority habitat, it becomes active in our list. Again, these are nests that have been active in the previous 5 years for the species that they are listed as. And then they are put into this database and updated annually. So while the primary data is from our own survey data, we do include data from our partners, including federal land managers, primarily BLM and U.S. Forest Service. And then we have trusted data partners, for example, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. These are groups we've worked with for decades in some cases. We have good information on sort of their protocols, their survey methodology, their training programs, and they're considered a trusted data source. There is a third source of data that is probably far less represented in these databases, but we do accept data from third parties, including counties, other local planning agencies, developers, their consultants, and NGOs. In those cases, depending on sort of the history with that program, and these are CPW verified data, meaning they go on our list of nests for our own staff and our own programs to look at. In some cases, we evaluate the data supplied and kind of make that decision. Most cases, we get a lat long and maybe a species, and so we just add it to our list to survey as well. We do welcome that data from partners to be submitted to CPW, and we happily include it in the database when verified. Trends for this year are somewhat similar to last year. We did see an increase in eagles, both bald and golden eagles. Again, these acres added are a net gain, so we had a lot of nests kind of drop off and added some. And we believe it's about a net gain, those numbers. I think it's 44 potential net gain of bald eagle nests based on that no surface occupancy. And for bald and golden eagles, that's a 1/4 mile buffer around the nest location. Golden eagles did increase this year, and although the percentage is higher, the acres are lower just because there's fewer nests. But that represents about a net gain of about 19 golden eagle nests in our database. We did see ferruginous hawks drop off. We did gain some last year. This year we did lose some nests, so about 5,000 acres related to ferruginous hawk nest locations was removed from the database. And while we had slight increases in both peregrine and prairie falcon, again, a small number of acres. And to be honest, I think we have pretty low overlap between certainly peregrine falcons and oil and gas operations because they nest in pretty cliff faces and pretty areas that are pretty hard to access. In terms of the overall, goshawk is the other, there were no changes, I don't believe, in goshawk, so I didn't include them on here. The other raptor on the list is the Mexican spotted owl, and that database is maintained by, I think, by BLM, but it's part of their listed species, federally listed, and so it's part of that critical habitat mapping that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provides. I think that's all I had on raptors. And so then I think I'll turn it back over to Taylor as we move to the aquatic updates.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Moving into some of these aquatic updates, I will note that in 2023, CPW staff conducted a statewide review of our aquatic HPH designations database and the corresponding GIS layers. Moving forward, CPW's aquatic section does intend to conduct more of a regional-based aquatic review that tracks the SAM process that most of you are familiar with. The only difference being that the aquatic reviews will likely, internal for CPW, take place during the winter months rather than the summer months. And this is due to field work schedules of our aquatic biologists and when they can find the time to do these reviews. I point that out just to kind of make note. We have made the offer to operators and stakeholders in the past that if there are specific waterways that you would like reviewed by CPW to kind of see if they meet the designations, we are happy to accept those requests and review those. But just know the earlier you can get those to us, the better. It's a process to field verify that and have our biologists get out and do that. And then also, I think now that there'll be this rotation going on to make sure that it gets in there at the adequate time to make the updates. So keep that in mind. Below here on this slide, you can see the proposed changes for the 4 aquatic HPH layers, with a note that this year there are no proposed changes to the cutthroat trout crucial habitat layer. Also, I'd like to point out that these changes to the gold medal waters, they result from additions to the gold medal designation on the Gunnison River and Taylor River in Gunnison County. And these were actually gold medal water approvals that the CPW Commission made back in January of 2023, but they were not incorporated into last year's rulemaking process due to the draft maps kind of already being posted at that time and just slightly too late to make it in for last year. I'm going to go here to the 1202C layer real quick that Karen had already displayed. Just talk about this in a little bit more detail. As she mentioned, these red areas are additions to the 2023 maps. Black areas are proposed removals. And want to make note that obviously the linear kind of ribbon type features you see on this map are going to be these aquatic stream designations. And you can see that a bulk of the black or the removal areas occur kind of in the Piceance Basin, so Rio Blanco County, up into Moffat County and Western Routt County. These were primarily, not necessarily entirely, but primarily these changes were removals from the sport fish management category. And in large part, these were waterways that our biologists determined did not have adequate year-round flows to support a sport fish population. So they were either ephemeral or intermittent in nature and were removed for that reason. And then, as Karen mentioned, on the Eastern Plains, you'll see a few additions, and those were primarily to that native species conservation waters. And I think a result of sampling efforts out there that have confirmed the presence of those native species that are considered to trigger that designation or that category. And then you'll see the percent increases and acreage changes associated with those that I talked about down here, similar to the Raptor numbers that Karen displayed. And the only other thing I will note on this one is with the asterisk down there, gold medal waters are included in ECMC regulations, but they're actually not specifically listed by CPW as a high priority habitat layer. Okay, moving into the Northwest region specifics and the SAM mapping process that was done, I'd like to provide a little bit of brief background information. The SAM mapping process is done by one of CPW's 4 regions every year on a counterclockwise rotation around the state. You can see on this map, these pink lines are CPW's regional boundary layers, and you can kind of see essentially they carve the state up into 4 quadrants. A large portion of the proposed 2024 HPH updates are the result of SAM mapping efforts that occurred in CPW's Northwest region last year during 2023 through the summer and fall. Those of you that were involved in last year's rulemaking will know that a bulk of the changes last year were in CPW's Northeast region. So we bumped one to the west on that counterclockwise rotation. Also important to note that the last time CPW's Northwest region completed their SAM mapping efforts was in the year 2018. The COVID-19 pandemic forced CPW to skip a year of SAM mapping, and this has resulted in a 5-year gap since we've done updates instead of the typical 4-year cycle. And I point that out because that one extra year, does mean that there's kind of extra time, extra changes on the landscape that are being incorporated into this year's updates. So you'll see in some layers that results in kind of more significant changes maybe than would have been done otherwise. This slide specifically lists the HPH layers that are present in CPW's Northwest region and that are subject to the SAM mapping process. You can see that most of this consists of the big game seasonal ranges found within rule category 1202D. And another quick reminder about CPW SAM and HPH data is that these layers are utilized by a diverse group of state and federal agencies, local governments, NGOs, private consultants and industry, et cetera, and used also for various land use planning and permitting purposes. So the take-home message here is that CPW's wildlife layers are not developed specifically or solely for the ECMC regulations. It just happens to be one of many places where these map layers are used. Okay, jumping into some of these layers specifically, I separated out here these winter range habitats, which consist of severe winter ranges and winter concentration areas. Changes to these proposed layers, as you can see here, range between increases of approximately 1% to just over 4% for our elk severe winter range. It's important to note, as Dr. Voltura mentioned, these percent increases are specific to these individual layers and are not independent of each other due to the overlap that occurs within all of these seasonal ranges. So keep in mind that the total proposed increase for all Rule 1202D HPH layers is only 2%, even though you'll see some larger percent increases to these individual layers. Also, not specifically included in the slides today, I realized, and it's because I accidentally omitted this one, but I did want to mention elk production or calving areas are another one of those 1202D layers that undergoes the SAM mapping process. And CPW is proposing this year a 3% increase to those elk production areas. Some of the larger addition in those production or calving areas falls around the Steamboat Springs area, kind of what we call the Steamboat Front on the west side of the Zirkle mountain range. And just quick reason for that, it primarily is an ongoing elk research project that CPW has going on and efforts to deploy elk GPS collars, which has informed some calving activity in that area that was previously unknown. Okay, staying with these big game winter range layers, I want to speak about a few consistent themes that at least I know kind of came up during the SAM mapping sessions as reasons for proposed changes for these 2024 layers. Probably the biggest that I want to talk about is the use of, I'd say within the last several years, more so the use of new GPS collar technology on animals that are being deployed and the location data that comes with those. Also, along with that, the extensive winter classification flight observations that CPW does and the location data that comes with that, as far as locations of herds and wildlife during the winter months. These really are some of the leading reasons for changes to a lot of these winter range HPH categories. Additionally, CPW's Northwest region did experience one of the worst winters observed over the last couple decades during the 2022-2023 winter. Extreme temperatures and snow conditions resulted in altered use of the landscape by big game animals, and in a lot of areas influenced CPW's understanding and subsequent mapping, especially with some of those severe winter range categories. And then lastly, I included a map on this slide of wildfires that have occurred. These are burn perimeters. And you can tell here that a significant area within the Northwest region of the state has burned in wildfires. This is since 2018. And this actually includes two of the largest three wildfires in Colorado's recorded history. And as you can imagine, these wildfires often result in significant changes to the vegetation community and to habitat conditions within these areas. So, this may result in areas that are temporarily unsuitable for certain life history stages for wildlife, like calving or fawning. Or on the flip side, oftentimes as these areas recover from these burns, there's new vegetative growth that results in increased winter range opportunities because there's new winter forage resources for animals to utilize. Okay, moving on to big game migration corridors. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about these. In terms of acreage, these are likely, I think, the largest changes and increases that CPW is proposing to the HPH layers. I believe from about 2022 to 2023 is when CPW partnered with Western State University to analyze migration patterns of almost 2,000 GPS-collared mule deer and elk. These GPS collars collected over 3.8 million unique point locations that were used to run an analysis or methodology called the Brownian Bridge Movement Model, or BBMM, you'll see it referred to as. This effort was to delineate areas of concentrated migratory use based on the GPS collars and locations. These areas were then used as a reference layer during CPW SAM mapping sessions, where they are combined with expert knowledge and other relevant data to produce what you see as the best available science regarding big game migration corridors in Colorado. I will note that a more detailed explanation of this Brownian Bridge methodology is included in CPW's summary document that I mentioned earlier. And I'll also point out to mark on your calendars, CPW's Wildlife Movement Coordinator, her name is Michelle Kawarden, is scheduled to give a more in-depth presentation of how CPW maps migration corridors, including this Brownian Bridge methodology, at the ECMC Commission meeting that is scheduled on February 28th. For those who would like to tune in for a little bit more detail on this, Michelle can speak much more eloquently as the expert than I can about the specific methodology. So I think you'll find that helpful. You may be wondering why CPW chose to incorporate this methodology during this map update rulemaking. And there's a few factors that led to CPW conducting the analysis that I mentioned. First, again, technological advances have led to the more widespread use of GPS collars versus older technology that was in wildlife collars like VHF that did not record specific location data of animals. Second, several state and federal efforts, including the BLM's Big Game Resource Management Plan Amendment, the Department of Interior's Secretarial Order 3362, and also the original Senate Bill 181 rulemaking process, all kind of highlighted or indicated a need for CPW to better delineate these areas that are most important to big game during their seasonal migrations. And third, I'll point out there was legislation passed in Colorado in 2022 that offered greater protections on CPW's sensitive data, including these GPS point locations. As a result of this, it allowed CPW to compile this huge data set of sensitive data and be able to run these larger scale analyses. And then, I'll also note it's not necessarily the first time that CPW has used the Brownian Bridge movement modeling to inform our SAM mapping process. On a more limited basis or to a limited extent, this same process was used during CPW's 2008 mapping in the Northwest region for specific areas in the Northwest corner, and then also in the 2019 mapping that the Southwest region did. And then be aware that we're proposing these large expansions, again, to individual layers. However, due to the overlap with other existing layers, the overall statewide increase to HPH is only, so for all HPH layers, the overall increase is only about 1.5%, even though I think as you view these layers, you'll see that individually these are increasing or proposed to be increased by quite a bit. Another thing, that Brownian Bridge movement model does imply that there's a certain degree of modeling done with this, but I just want to note that really the modeling comes into play with helping kind of connect GPS point locations and where that animal potentially traversed in between those locations being submitted by the caller. The model does not extrapolate this data to other areas where we do not have data. These corridors really are based on where actual GPS collared animals moved, and it's not some kind of guess or modeling exercise to try to extrapolate this to other areas. It's just where we have the actual data. And then the last point on this slide is just kind of from an operational standpoint, just a reminder that these migration corridor areas for CPW standpoint do not have a seasonal timing limitation. And I just like to point that out for the fact that, it's not stacking additional timing restrictions onto areas where they may overlap with winter ranges or other habitats and kind of constraining that operational window that I know is difficult as it is to work around it sometimes. The last item here I think we have to touch base on is these Rule 309E1 HPH category or layers. And this captures really the remainder of CPW's HPH layers that are not within 1202C or 1202D that we've already talked about. As a reminder, these 309E1 category or layers trigger a consultation with CPW during the permitting process. They do not contain any areas that are considered no surface occupancy, and they do not trigger compensatory mitigation. Overall changes within this category this year are being proposed are relatively minor, 0.05%. But you can see that there's a few individual layers, again, that had slightly larger changes resulting from the Northwest region's SAM mapping process and the statewide updates. Specifically, changes in the Northwest to Columbian sharp-tailed grouse winter range resulted from 2 research projects that have been completed since 2018. One was done in Colorado. The other was actually a project in Wyoming, but had overlap with Colorado. Both of these had transmitters on Columbian sharp-tailed grouse that helped track locations and identified new areas of winter range for this species that were previously undocumented in Colorado. So that contributed to this increase that you see. And then I spoke to it earlier there. This decrease in greater sage grouse general habitat is a result of the area that I talked about west of Craig in Moffett County. Due to the conversion of general habitat to priority habitat, we did have a fair amount of decrease to this category. And then I'll point out there's one area over along the Colorado-Utah border near Dinosaur National Monument. And again, collaboration with our neighboring states. The state of Utah has been conducting a research project on greater sage grouse. They have GPS transmitters on birds that have crossed into Colorado and spent a significant amount of time in a small area that's called the Wild Mountain area. And CPW did not previously have this mapped even as occupied habitat. And so based on that data, we made some slight expansions and incorporated that area into the greater sage grouse general habitat. And again, those changes were part of working with BLM on the Sage Grouse Resource Management Plan amendment. Those have been incorporated into that draft plan, and stakeholders and cooperating agencies during that were kind of involved during these proposed changes as well. And then last here, Dr. Valtura already mentioned, as far as golden and bald eagles are concerned, that the number of nests based on survey efforts has increased. She talked about those quarter-mile NSO buffers that are associated with that. Under Rule 309E1, there's also a half-mile buffer associated with those nest sites that typically triggers things like timing considerations. And so you could imagine those also have increased along with those nests since they're a buffer around those. And so that was another category that kind of led to overall the slight increase under 309E1. Lastly here, again, thanks again. We appreciate everybody taking the time out of your schedule to join us today, especially those of you that may be hearing this now for the second or possibly third times. I did want to mention CPW staff now has conducted, I believe, 9 individual stakeholder outreach meetings going back into November of 2023. The intent of those meetings has been to explore specific areas of interest, also discuss how some of these proposed map changes can affect permitting or operations based on those changes. And that being said, we're definitely still open to taking those requests if you are interested. I would ask stakeholders out there that may be interested to help coordinate those meetings through Mrs. Larson and ECMC. But CPW staff is definitely more than happy to have those individualized discussions and drill in on individual areas a little bit more to explore those changes. And I think that is all we have. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Larson maybe before we take questions and let her decide how we're handling that.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you very much, Karen, for that presentation. Very informative. I do have a very brief presentation for members of our audience. It's to go over timing, and perhaps I'll just run through that very quickly, and then we can allow attendees to raise their hands if you have questions about the information you have seen today. So if you give me one moment, I will push a button and perhaps make this work. Let's see. All right, I am now sharing. Sorry for the delay there. So again, I just have a few brief comments to make about the upcoming timeline. So our rules at ECMC require that we notice the rulemaking for the high priority habitat maps no later than February 28th of each year. So we will be filing the maps that Taylor and Karen walked us through as a proposed rulemaking with the Secretary of State no later than February 28th. And when we make that filing with the Secretary of State, we'll also have a draft statement of basis and purpose that discusses the basis for the rules and the proposed maps and why this rulemaking is being proposed. That information will be available on our website. It will be sent out to a rulemaking email list that we keep and maintain at ECMC. So there will certainly be notice and information about that when it occurs. We will have the opportunity for members of the public who wish to be parties to this rulemaking to do so. We ask that you will sign up via a Google form that we will publish on our website. And the deadline to sign up to be a party to this rulemaking will be March 15th. And again, that will be on our website and easy to find. And then finally, the actual date of the rulemaking is scheduled for Wednesday, May the 22nd. And that is that. So I proceed. So where can you find more information on our website? If you go to our main page and look under news and notices, we will post information about, again, when we file the rules with the Secretary of State, and additional information about how to participate in the rulemaking. We currently have on our website under news and notices information about how to access the proposed maps through our GIS system, and also a web form that allows individuals to provide us feedback on the maps. We look at all the feedback, all that information is also shared with CPW. So if you do have comments about the maps and would like to provide those comments to us now, please do so. And then, oh, sorry, I have the wrong title on this slide. This should be the high priority habitat rulemaking information, but the location of where you can find this information on high priority habitats and all of our pending rulemakings, including cumulative impacts, is on the hearings page here at ECMC. And then if you go to the rulemaking tab, you will find the links to these and other rulemakings. So I will stop sharing my screen. And again, if there are questions that individuals have about the maps, the process, the timeline, please go ahead and just raise your hand, and then we can elevate you and bring you into the meeting so you may ask your question. So I don't know who's speaking on behalf of Rocky Mountain Wild, but it looks as if you have a question. If you'd like to unmute. Oh, there we are. Hi.
Hi, I'm Allison Golinsky, conservation geographer at Rocky Mountain Wild. I was participating in the Bureau of Land Management Big Game amendment process, and they included pinch point, migration pinch point information in their mapping. And I was wondering, does ECMC have any plans to do rulemaking to add that to their wildlife rules?
Thank you for that question. And we do have the intention of conducting a rulemaking on the pinch points. It is likely that that rulemaking is going to occur in 2025. We have approximately 4 rulemakings that are slated and mandated by statute that must occur before the end of 2024. So realistically, looking at bandwidth and our calendar to be able to accommodate that rulemaking, we were just unable to do so in 24. So it is coming, but not this year.
Thank you.
And if there are any other questions, again, just go ahead and raise your hand and we will bring you into the meeting. Well, I'm not seeing questions from anyone else. Oh, just as I said that, one moment, we'll bring someone in. And forgive me, I don't know how to, oh, there you are. I don't want to try to pronounce your last name. I will mispronounce it, so apologies.
My apologies, Matt Copes of Boulder County Parks and Open Space. I just wanted to quickly ask, didn't know burrowing owl mentioned in the mapping today. There was some feedback from our group about burrowing owl protections and surveying for nesting owls as part of this process. I just wanted to mention that.
I did not mention that in my updates. There are some proposed updates and you'll be able to see those if you look at the maps. And we did take into account, there was some information we got last year that couldn't be updated. Those should have been rolled into this year and we'll double check that. But the last I checked, everything was updated. And it's a pretty small data set because for burrowing owls, sometimes we have to do site specific surveys, but where we know locations, those should be mapped and should be included in that layer as well.
And I think the little additional request there was making sure that burrowing owls were surveyed or resurveyed if construction does not begin within a year after approval, and any necessary adjustments to the schedule to be made to protect those nest sites, just because nesting can change during the planning window.
And thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, well, I'm not seeing any additional questions from participants. So with that, we'll end today's stakeholder meeting and we'll make sure that we have a copy of this meeting on our YouTube channel and also within our rulemaking folder. So if you would like to go back and see the presentation, it will be available. Give us 2-ish days, probably by next Monday. Today's Thursday. It will be up in those different places. We'll also have the actual PowerPoints themselves available in the rulemaking folder. So with that, thank you all very much for participating. We really appreciate it. And if there are additional questions or needs for additional stakeholder meetings with ECMC and CPW, do please reach out to me. My information is on our website and we can get those meetings scheduled. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.